Welcome to the D6 Family Ministry Podcast, a place where ideas, principles, and personalities come together to give you a ministry advantage that empowers the church and home.
I don't know anything more important in our society or in the kingdom of God than to help the church, help the family.
Discipleship is not an event, it's a way of life.
And one day it just hit me that discipleship at home was not about doing more. It was about inviting Christ into what we were already doing.
The goal of family ministry is not families sitting on the couch holding hands and singing Kumbaya. The ultimate goal is families that love God, love people, and make disciples of all peoples.
So that's why you're here. You're here to say 1 hour a week, as significant and as awesome as it is, we know that it's not enough and we want to be intentional with every hour.
You're listening to the D6 Podcast. Here are your hosts, Marianne Howard, Ron Hunter, and Josh Wooten.
We were talking off the air a little bit about this, and we didn't give our answers, so this is going to be a little bit of surprise to all of us and our audience. But Dave Ramsey calls it stupid tax. I think Robbie Gallaty calls it dumb tax. I've called it investment tuition. But what mistakes have you made that you think, oh man, that was really dumb, or man, that cost me, or something in there that you just had to own it at the end of the day and go, man, that's a big lesson learned?
I actually have two because I just remembered one. Ron, you're going to die because I know you didn't even know this. But first of all, on the subject of Robbie Gallaty, just this little side story. When D6 was, setting up their MCs for the conference for 2022, I had spent some time with the D6 team in person at another conference that we were at, and the team and I were having a conversation, and I was talking literally about Robbie Gallaty as though I knew him, and I kept calling him Randy Gallaty. Randy.
I remember that.
It's like, no, it's Robbie, and I hadn't been asked to MC yet, and so Ron is just going on the inside. What have we gotten ourselves into? This girl can't say names right, and so. That's one of my stupid taxes, but the other one is, and so I've asked Ron to write something for me, and I send an email. So, I'm writing a book, or I've written this book, and I've sent this email to Ron to officially ask him to do something for me. And I asked him to write my foreword. And I spell it wrong. I spell forward wrong. I'm like, I look at it, and because to ask someone to write a forward, it's not forward like fast forward. It's FORE word.
You
right?
are not the first person to make that mistake, Marianne.
And Ron responds back with the correct spelling, and I am like pulled over with my head in my hands going, I'm writing this book. They're publishing this book, and I can't even spell forward.
Here's the deal. Here's what I tell our team all the time. We can correct spelling, we can correct grammars, but we cannot correctly assert great content. And that's why you were invited to write your book. You have great content. We can fix the other. But I love it. That's hilarious. Can I jump in here with a complimentary one that'll make you feel better? Okay. When publishing my first book, my co-author and I, we wrote a handful of people asking endorsements. Okay. And one of the people on the list that my co-author asked permission from, his name is Squire Rushnell. Now, some of you may not remember him, but he was big on Oprah with the Godwinks. That's what he was known for. He said yes, and we got some wonderful yeses in there. Well, I followed up and said thank you to him. After he said yes, I'll write the endorsement. So I'm writing Squire Rushnell and got confused and went on oozing, hey, I grew up listening to your songs, thinking Squire Parsons. And I was describing everything about Squire Parsons, assigning it to Squire Rushnell, copying my co-author. My co-author writes back and goes, Ron, wrong person. And there's no way to unsend an email you've already sent hours ago. And it was like, okay, he's not going to write this endorsement for us. Thank goodness he took it so well, handled it with great humility, and moved on through that one. So, Josh, you've never paid stupid tax, have you?
Oh my goodness gracious! I probably paid more stupid tax than I paid to Uncle Sam. To be honest, I remember I was new to ministry, and we had the church van. You know, everybody has a church van. Not everybody. We were fortunate enough to have one of the old Econoline church vans, and the youth had used it for a mission trip, and I was going to use it to do some running around with some kids for kids camp, and it needed washed. And our secretary at the church said, "Hey, you need to hand wash that one. You know, that really doesn't do well, and wash it, through the car washes." And I thought, what do you mean does it do well? Like, it doesn't do a good job? I was like, I'm running this thing through a car wash. So I go to run it through the car wash, and it had these giant mirrors on the side, that went out. So they were aftermarket, so you could see the back when you pulled a trailer with this van. And I'm in the car wash, and all of a sudden the brushes get hooked up with the side mirror and proceeds to peel that thing back away from the door like a can opener. So by the time I finish getting through the car wash, half of the door seems to be ripped off because and they've stopped the machine and all the workers have to come out. And here I sit, and all I hear is the secretary going, "Yeah, it doesn't do well in the car." Yeah, because she is also the ones that write the checks, and I was very fortunate that she didn't decide to dock my pay on that one and make me pay for that damage a little bit over time. So yeah, it was a very costly learning experience for the church and for me. And next time I told somebody they couldn't run it through the car wash, I had a good story to tell.
I tell you what, we paid stupid tax either in our pride or our paycheck. I think we've all dropped our phones. An iPad's gotten run over, or something weird has happened out there at some point for us. But we do. We pay that tax. And our guest today, Chad Harrington, is going to talk about some key areas on pride, humility, and how our vulnerability with our relationships makes all the difference. And so I want us to jump in, listen to Chad. He's going to walk this through. He's a very unassuming guy, and he, without a doubt, will pose some questions to help you ponder in the relationships you have to earn that key connection point with the relationships that matter. On the other side of this break, Chad Harrington.
Magnify Jesus this Easter with the new D6 Everyday Easter Adventure. Each kit includes a set of 12 devotions that prepare families to celebrate Easter with a spotlight on Jesus. Daily family activities, discussion questions, prayer suggestions, crafts, and recipes are included to help you extend family discipleship to everyday life. Help your family discover a joyful and refreshing understanding of the true meaning of Easter. Order your Easter Adventure Kit now at d6family.com.
We are joined today by Chad Harrington. Chad is teaching deacon at Harpeth Christian Church in Franklin, Tennessee. He holds degrees from Ozark Christian College and Asbury Theological Seminary. He's the author of discipleship books such as Your Spiritual Formation Plan. He co-authored Dedicated and has recently written The Revolutionary Disciple. He founded and runs Harrington Interactive Media, a publishing company specializing in discipleship resources. Chad, I'm so thrilled that you're with us today.
Thanks, Casey.
So I think we all can admit that we struggle with pride, right? You let
Not
it break
me.
out. Exactly. No, you let it break out here at D6 around the Revolutionary Disciple book that you have written. And it's talking about humility in the home. I think if you can't admit you struggle with pride, you probably struggle with pride, right?
I think so,
And I think that bleeds into every aspect of our life. And if we're honest as parents, it probably hinders us from a solid relationship with our kids, and then obviously into discipleship. How does that play a part if we can't get past our pride?
Well, so Jim Putman and I have been working together on this message for a while, since 2018. And when he called me to discuss this, basically my dad had kind of commissioned us to write this together. And when he called me, he said, there's only one thing I really want to talk about right now, and it's how pride is just wrecking discipleship. And I was like, okay, wow, let's start that conversation. Light note, I've known Jim for 10 or 15 years now. And so he's got a great and vast experience in North America. He and his organization have trained literally over 100,000 leaders.
Wow.
Mostly in the United States, but abroad too. And he said, the one thing that just wrecks discipleship is pride. And it's so subtle and seething that you don't even know it. It terrified me when I learned as a sophomore in high school, I read The Great Sin chapter by C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity. And I thought I was a pretty good kid. And I was, like, objectively speaking, like I had, kind of the goody two-shoes thing. Then I read that chapter and I was like, oh no, I'm ruined. Because I realized I had pride in my heart and it was pretty deep. And so, as a parent now, I can see, I've learned from other people what not to do, and I'm trying to replicate that. But there's nothing more attractive than a truly humble person, and there's nothing more repulsive than someone who's just filled with pride. And so you can teach that in the home by modeling it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what does it look like then for us as parents to like break down the walls and show humility? I think sometimes humility feels like exposure, like we're too vulnerable. And as parents, maybe sometimes we might feel weird about that, like threatened, like humble towards our kids. That seems like we're the authority here. So how does that relationship play out when we show humility in our parenting?
Yeah, so I remember also in high school, I was trying to figure this out for the first time ever. Like, oh no, I'm ruined. What do I do? So I asked a man named Tim Anderson at my church. I was like, what is humility? Like, can you define it for me? Like, how do you become humble? And he said, the way to become humble is through humiliation. And I was like, interesting.
No one likes to hear that. Yeah.
And if you think about it, the humiliation of Jesus was the incarnation and the cross. And he willingly chose it. So the way that I define a humble disciple is someone who knows exactly who they are before God and chooses willingly to go lower. And so there's a lot of rights conversation going on right now. I've got my rights to this and my rights to that. And it's like, hey, look, you do as an American. But you know what we have as Christians? We have rights that we're called to lay down. In fact, the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords had every right to do everything. He's the king of the cosmos, and he laid that down. It says he didn't consider his deity something to be grasped or held onto. He laid down that right, the rights that come with being the Son of God, which I don't even fully know what that means, but it says the Father put all things under his authority. All things kind of means all things. So if anyone had rights to hang on to, it was Jesus Christ, but he willingly laid those down. So what does it look like to be humble? First of all, you have to really know who you are. And then you have to choose to take a step lower than what your rights are. And what that looks like practically is 4 things. And so this was liberating when I figured this out. And it's not like I figured out something that's novel. It's just I assimilated this for myself. And I was like, oh, I don't have to wince when I pray for humility. And I also don't have to guess whether I'm being humble or not. Humility of heart is intangible, but there's also clear, sure signs you're being humble. And kids love it. And in fact, it establishes our authority more. So the 4 things are this. You submit to authority. You serve people. You listen. And you confess when you mess up. And if you kind of look, I'm a little bit of a structure guy, so the reason that this sat so well with me is because I realized these are the positive and negative, the giving and receiving ends of both words and action. So when we submit to authority, we're receiving the kind of power and authority of someone else. you could think of that as negative action. In other words, you're receiving the actions of someone over you. Serving is proactively, positively using your actions to help other people. And then when you listen, you're receiving words, and when you confess, you're giving words positively. And so it covers the positive and negative side of words and actions. And in Ephesians 4:2, Paul says, be completely humble. And so Ephesians kind of unpacks what that looks like. And so it's difficult to look my 3.5-year-old daughter Emma in the eye and say, hey, Daddy made a mistake. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I unjustly disciplined you. I didn't realize X, Y, or Z. I'm sorry. The temptation is to believe that actually discredits me, but what it does is it builds relationship and trust. And there's nothing more important to relationship and authority than true trust. And man, my parents modeled this for me. My dad's Canadian, and he moved to the South, and it's just an explosive combination. He's a miracle given. He became a Christian at 19, and had his own experiences, but God redeemed him. And he's sometimes rough around the edges. I'm never that way. No, as you know, Canadians are a little kind of abrupt sometimes because it's cold. It's like, we got to talk quickly. It's cold out. Let's get inside. And so, but he would always come to us or my mom and apologize. And I saw it modeled. There's that quote, kids are never good at listening to their elders, but they never fail to imitate them. That's from James Baldwin, which I don't agree with everything James Baldwin said, but that's where the quote comes from.
That's a good quote.
Yeah, it was actually in the context of generational poverty in Harlem is when he said that in his essay, Fifth Avenue Uptown. And I think it's interesting to think about generational spiritual poverty. We're trying to break generational sin. And the only way to do that is not to talk about it, but to do it. And so I think that's our challenge as parents is let's take action. And so I love the fact that Jesus showed us how to be humble. He didn't just say, pray for it, feel in your heart, and hope that you have a humble heart. He said, come follow me. And in fact, in Matthew 11, he says, come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I'll give you rest. Pride is a burden we bear. He says, learn from me because I'm gentle and humble in heart.
Yeah. Man, that's so good. That's so good. I hope you guys are writing that down. People who are listening, those are just great tips for us to hear as parents. So how then can we teach our kids to be humble without humbling them ourselves? Like when we see pride rise up in their hearts without putting them in their place, but also teaching them humility in that scenario.
That's a great question. I'm toying around with this idea, so excuse my experimental thoughts out loud, but I'm toying around with this idea of body first discipleship. So it's kind of like, how do you teach your child to be humble in heart? It's like, I don't know. How do you teach a child to pray from the heart? I don't know, but I can teach my daughter to kneel. And I think by the bodily expressions of obedience, God uses that to teach our heart. So I'm a young father. I'll find out if I'm right or wrong in the future, but I'm having my daughter, my son's only 8 months, so he doesn't know English yet, but I'm having my daughter confess things when she messes up, but she doesn't understand forgiveness yet. She'll learn it by doing it. So I think there's this interesting concept of learning by doing. So, but then we've got to train the heart as we go. So it's a little bit of a prayerful exercise in the midst of that.
Yeah. We're talking about fighting pride and showing humility in the home. We're here with Chad Harrington, and we've got more, so stay tuned. We'll be right back in just a moment.
Give your children and grandchildren a way to treasure your handwritten words with our new Generational Legacy Journal. About You, About Me, Generational Legacy Journal will guide you in telling your story while describing your kids or grandkids in ways that capture their hearts and leave an inspiring legacy. The left side pages tell your story, while the right side tells theirs, from the trivial to the powerful. Your child or grandchild will know each insight came from your experiences and observations about their life, their curiosities, their big milestones, and more, drawing them in to learn from your memories, insights, and encouragement. All the while, they will intentionally bump into Scripture and your faith values. Visit d6family.com to order your copy of this Generational Legacy Journal today.
And we are back. So, Chad, we're talking about showing humility. We're setting pride aside. And even though that's what our flesh wants, we want to live in that pride, right? And so we have to strive toward humility. What can we expect to start changing in our home when pride is set aside?
The tension will go away pretty immediately. There's nothing more annoying than having unresolved conflict. And if you're like me, the temptation is to just pretend like I didn't do anything wrong. That conflict was all her. But a humble person chooses to go first. And so one of the rules of life that we've kind of solidified for our family is we will be the first to admit mistakes and faults. And so if everyone is the first to admit their mistakes, then everyone confesses. So that's kind of the family culture we're trying to create. So I think, man, it's a more peaceful environment. You know, the Proverbs say it's better for a man to live on the corner of his house than to have a quarrelsome wife. That goes both ways. I think quarrelsome husbands can be the same. And the truth is, I have to watch myself. Otherwise, I can be that quarrelsome person. But because my parents discipled me, it's easy because I saw it. Not a lot of people have that modeled, so you kind of have to say, Holy Spirit, will you teach me humility? And it's just, there's nothing to hide. I think intimacy comes from humility, because then you don't act like you're better than anyone else and you're more approachable. So these are all things I continue to learn in new layers and depth. But as I disciple guys too in a discipleship group, I find that their respect for me goes up when I admit my mistakes and faults. Whereas if I'm just a talking head kind of teacher, then they actually kind of put me up on a pedestal. I think the same thing with kids. If you act like you got it all together, one day they're going to realize you're a terrible person. And even worse, you hid it.
Yeah.
And so they're going to hate you for it. I think it can create really deep bitterness and resentment. So go ahead and just put your cards on the table, say you're messed up. But then you can also say when God does something beautiful in you and he's redeeming you, and then they can journey with you. So really, I think it's magnetic and attractive and encouraging for other people who struggle too. Hey, welcome to the human race. You know?
Yeah. How does pride then, or how does humility help us in discipling our kids?
It gives us a pathway, I think. So Jesus modeled humility, which is like he had nothing to confess, but it gives us something to pass on to our kids. So if a humble disciple does these kind of things, right, then it gives us a really clear metric. So, for example, Jim and I talk about the 5 spheres of discipleship. And so one of the spheres is the work in the world. So we call it the world sphere, which is where you live, work, and play. And so how are you humble on the sports field? Well, it means you follow the rules. You show up on time because those in authority ask you to be. So humility submits to authority unless the authority is asking you to outright sin. Other than that, it's interesting. Jesus, as a child, it says he submitted to his parents. What? Jesus submitted to death on a cross. He submitted to Pontius Pilate. It says that Jesus learned obedience from what he saw. Jesus was a humble disciple, and so we give our kids really the key to unlock all sorts of fruit of righteousness that comes through discipleship. Pride just wrecks it all. You can't be a disciple without actually being humble. It's just a non-starter. You literally can't submit if you're proud.
Yeah.
So good luck following Jesus.
Well, and we know that a healthy disciple is going to make another healthy disciple. And
Yeah.
so if you yourself are not, you're not going to be creating them as well.
Well, and that's what the Pharisees got wrong. They were proud in the heart. And so Jesus says, I am humble in heart, which is funny because C.S. Lewis said you can't be humble and say that you are. But Jesus did.
Jesus can.
But yeah, it really is. It's beautiful to see it, and it's something I aim for. So I talk about, Paul says, be completely humble. What does he mean? I don't think he means flawlessly humble. I think he means that all the rooms of the house of your heart are open to God's cleansing. So as soon as you know about something consciously, you'll yield it. But you'll still make mistakes because you're human, right? Complete humility is a posture, not perfection.
Yeah,
so it's something
good.
we can actually do. We can actually be completely humble. Doesn't mean we'll always be humble, but it means in general that's the orientation and trajectory of our lives.
So this book that you've written, The Revolutionary Disciple, how can that be a good resource for parents and church leaders?
Oh, man. So if you're like, man, my disciple-making efforts aren't working, I can tell you it's most likely not your program or your strategy. It's probably heart level. And so you can walk with people through this resource and really kind of work with them and walk through the 5 spheres of discipleship, which are in Christ is sphere 1. The second sphere is in the church world. And then at home is sphere 3. Sphere 4 is the world. So where you live, work, and play. And then the 5th one is the spiritual realm, kind of a metasphere, like a spheres. And so you can, if you're like, man, someone's really struggling with pride, or my kids are, or I need to work through this, you can go through this resource, and there's discussion questions. We have a whole sermon series, Sweet, where you can preach through it or take your small groups through it in 6 weeks and kind of clean house with pride. And those who have ears will hear, and that's the best you can do. Only God can really heal a proud heart. I know that from experience. So I'm actually about to disciple my guys through it. So I've got 5 guys I meet with, and we're about to actually read. I'm like, read my book. No, it's my group. No, but seriously, I'm excited about it because
as humble as I can.
Yeah, it's an amazing book. You've got to read it. But no, I mean, it just shows how much I believe in this message. Right. And truth be told, we confess a lot in it. It's like, here's how we messed up. But it's so liberating. You got nothing to hide. Yeah. Jesus is the revolutionary disciple. And so we get to follow him.
Awesome. Well, Chad, thank you so much for being here and sharing this with us.
Yeah, thanks, Casey.
What a great interview. And he goes after the jugular in a couple of ways.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
He's
not holding any
going
punches.
after pride. He's going after our pride hard.
So how was the conviction rate for you guys? Holy Spirit convicting over what he's saying here?
11.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
But what I love is as he shares the importance of humility. And he made the statement, humility is knowing exactly who you are before God and then choosing to go lower.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know for me, we've all seen leaders that exemplify humility in our lives. I know for me, we were at beach camp this past summer, and my pastor, you don't see many senior pastors being willing to serve in middle school ministry, period. But then to go and camp and be a counselor and stay in their room. But I walked in, I couldn't find him one day, and The boys had clogged up the toilet, and here's my senior pastor on his knees with rubber gloves cleaning out middle school boy 5-day camp stuff.
Oh,
And
man.
I had never felt more respect, though, as a leader. I thought this it exemplifies humility, and that's what Chad is getting at there.
Yeah, I'm gonna cry foul on you, Josh. Beach camp, I don't know, oxymoronic statement sounds like to me. Is that roughing it or what? Come on.
It's really not
Our
hard to
listeners are
get
thinking
people to
this.
send. It's really not hard to get people to sign up for camp if your camp is located on the Gulf Coast beach in Panama City Beach, Florida.
Exactly.
Helps us also get leaders.
Yes, yes. Well, by the way, I know there's a big prominent organization that does beach camp down there, but I also know how you guys do beach camp, and I'm impressed with how you do it. You do your own. You're down there, and this is a fun environment, but it also has that plug-in moments, and I really love how you balance it. So I don't want to leave you out there hanging on that one. You know, here's one thing that I found interesting, because when people talk about ideas, concepts, you're sitting there going, how do they define it? How can I know how I'm doing it? And he tossed out 4 measurables that we can see here. And so here's the way we do this. When a speaker mentions 4 items, just pause and go, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how am I doing on this? So here's the 4 that he said that describes humility. How are you with submitting to authority? Scale of 1 to 10. How are you with serving people? Scale of 1 to 10. How are you with listening? Scale of 1 to 10. And then admitting that you mess up. Now, flip those around. Maybe you say, oh, I'm here, here, and here. Flip it around. Do you enjoy being the authority rather than submitting? Do you enjoy people serving you versus you serving others? Do you really enjoy talking more than listening? And do you avoid owning the responsibility and calling other people out more often? Think through that one. Those are tough areas.
They are, and they're great even for parenting, just thinking about that with children. I think something that resonates with me is early on in the interview, he said this, and I'd love for us to talk about it for just a second. There's nothing more attractive than a humble person, and there's nothing more repulsive than a prideful person. And I don't know about you guys, but arrogance, I can sniff it out.
Yeah.
And it is repulsive.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
It's stanky.
It's stanky. Josh, how do you challenge ministry leaders in your organization who suffers from the stanky pride? How do you coach that? Let's get into the Pastor Josh mode for a moment. Coach us up.
Well, when it comes to people being prideful, I think you have to point out the pride, which is, have those tough conversations and maybe helping to take the blinders off to go, I know this is probably not your heart. I don't think this is the way you're intending to come across. But others can perceive it in this way. And I know that's hard. You have to be a little empathetic, because in my heart of hearts, I have to realize I don't think people are genuinely trying to be prideful. It's usually something that seeps in, and it's like sin. Over time, it grows, and you don't notice it, in your own self as much as others can sometimes. And so I think just going to them and realizing, making that heart connection, just like you will with your kids. I don't think this is what you're shooting for or what you're intending to be, but this is how it's coming across. And what can we do to help in that? Because, and affirming maybe some of the things that cause them to swell up. When you have gifts or things going on and you're really great at something, sometimes you can think that, I've got it going on, I'm great at this, and exalt yourself. But it's, the old saying, you exalt yourself, God will find a way to humble you. And I think just in the coaching sense is, you have to affirm them while you're speaking truth in love.
Yeah.
I heard a pastor define pride in this way, and I think it's pretty good. You always will see immaturity and insecurity driving pride. You think about it. You think about arrogant leaders. Usually when you peel back the onion, there's deep insecurity. and there's deep immaturity.
Yeah,
Because I think humility, it comes from the fruit of the Spirit.
Mm.
And I think that's an immaturity issue. It's like when you want to be puffed up over Jesus and you want it to be about your kingdom, that speaks to the fruit.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. You know, Chad really challenged not only with regular relationships, but with your kids, being able to own the stupid tax and going to them and saying, hey, dad messed up or mom messed up. It's one of the ways that really, I think, solidifies some relationships. And I was thankful that somewhere midway through, you know, our time with our kids, we had people say to do that. And I remember the change of look on their face the first time I did that with my kids. And I was like, really, Dad, you're, and they're kind of a little taken aback because Dad's never admitted fault. They know I have faults, you know, and for us to have that conversation, then it becomes two ways. I think over the break, you heard a commercial about the Legacy Journal that we have put out. And I would challenge you to take a look at the Legacy Journal, because on one side of the page, you're talking about yourself. And on the right-hand side of the pages, you're talking about your son or your daughter. And I would challenge you that if you're writing in those journals and you're answering some of those wonderful questions in there, like, hey, what was my first job? What lessons did I learn? Don't just admit the good lessons, admit the bad lessons in there. And then that'll create conversations or really connections to your kids in the future. So work it out in the conversations, car rides, work it out in the bedtime conversations as you review the day. Just be vulnerable with your kids. Work out those issues with them, because the conversations will get richer when you're admitting those areas. So we look to next week. We've got a guest with us that is phenomenal. She's releasing a brand new book. And that person is none other than one of our co-hosts, Miss Marianne Howard. We're super excited about her new book and cannot wait. I got to be cautious. I can say this off the air, but I'm going to go ahead and say it right here on the air. I don't think she's heard me say this, but our team has heard me say this a lot in the last few months. I think this is going to be our breakout release for 2023, or at least one of them. Again, we got a couple of books coming out I think it's going to do tremendously well. But Marianne, I'm super excited about talking to you next week on the podcast about your new book. So thank you for that writing, and everybody stay tuned next week to hear more about that.
You've been listening to the D6 Podcast. You can learn more about D6 at d6family.com.